Hello and welcome to Catching Up with Council. I'm your host, Dan Monroe. Joining me today, Ward 17 Councilman Charles Slife. Councilman Slife, thank you so much for sitting at the desk with me today.
Thanks for having me, Dan. How you doing?
Appreciate it. Let's learn all about Ward 17,
Sure.
but first I want to find out a bit about you.
Sure.
This isn't your first time walking through the halls of City Hall, at least as a council person. You were here before that as an intern, right?
I started as an intern in the Economic Development Department in 2012, and then right at the tail end of 2012, I actually got hired into a position by the mayor's then chief of development. So I worked for about 4 years under former Chief Warren, Chief Ribka, in the mayor's office, working on economic development projects, city planning projects, building demolitions across the entire city. So I kind of had my finger in a lot of different pies. But it was useful because the day I came in as a council member, it was a bit of a homecoming, and knew if that first call I got from a constituent saying, "What do I do if my garbage can broke?" I already know who to go talk to because I was used to walking around City Hall and just seeing people anyway. So it was sort of a nice, a useful piece of the resume, but also helped my transition into council be a little easier, perhaps.
Was that during the time when you were working towards your master's degree over at
Yes,
Cleveland State?
yes. I was an intern. I finished my master's while working at the city of Cleveland, and did my master's in public administration with a focus in economic development. So everything was sort of in alignment, and it's proven to be very useful.
So in 2019, you were appointed to the council seat by now Public Safety Utilities Director. Thank you, Marty Kane.
Right.
How does that happen? How does he come and reach out to you and say, I mean, did you know him beforehand? Or how does he go to you to look to be appointed for this?
Sure. The true story that probably no one will believe, but so if the viewers aren't aware, if the city charter has it spelled out that if there's a vacancy on council and it's less than 2 years to the next election, someone is appointed by the council to fill the role until the next general election. So, I lived in West Park for a number of years. I was a member of the Development Corporation Board, just active in different ways. So I knew Councilman Kane from a couple different touch points. And, the true story is that I had, wasn't sure what my career direction it was going to go in, but I had thought about, should I consider public office? And I had mentioned it kind of in passing to him one day, but we never talked about it again until a couple years later. He approached me and said, I'd ask if you'd consider it. So, spoke with my family and thought that I could certainly fill the role for 2 years and then figure out what to do from that point. And about, a couple months in, decided that, I was enjoying myself, but I also felt that I had something to contribute, some good ideas for the neighborhood, and so I ran for election, and thankfully the voters of Ward 17 elected me to this full term.
Well, let's talk about Ward 17. We always talk about West Park, but what all makes up Ward 17?
Sure. Ward 17, I tell people, so West Park is all of Cleveland that's west of West 117th Street. So it encompasses about 2.5 wards. I tell people that Ward 17, if anyone knows the neighborhood, is generally the part of the neighborhood that is west of the RTA rapid tracks. It's about 90% accurate. So we're talking the Warren Road corridor, Rocky River Drive, Cam's Corners, the western end of Puritas Springs, Graydon Road, and also all the way down, including the entirety of the airport. So it's about 9 square miles in total, and it is bordered on the west side by the Rocky River Valley, and just a great neighborhood, very convenient, affordable. We have a lot of people moving into the neighborhood, and there's a lot of great stories to tell out of Ward 17.
You're in your second term,
yes,
I believe, as council person. What are some of the challenges, what are some of the opportunities you're facing right now?
Sure. So, the opportunities that I'm really focused on are in Ward 17 is one of what we now call the middle neighborhoods. So middle neighborhoods essentially are the Cleveland neighborhoods that are towards the edge of the city, adjacent to that first ring of suburbs, and in many ways are competing for residents and businesses and offering a comparable quality of life to that first suburb, across the line. So a focus of mine has been to really lean into Ward 17's strength as being, affordable, family-friendly, safe, and sort of doubling down on especially our amenities, our public infrastructure, so that people that are looking for somewhere to live, whether they're a tried and true West Sider, new to Cleveland, thinking about hopping over the river, that they think, wow, I really want to stay in Cleveland. I want to live in Ward 17 because this is a comparable, if not a better quality of life than what you can get nearby in the suburbs.
How do you feel, I was a West Sider myself. How do you look at when everyone talks about the West Side, East Side, the West versus East? Is that something, or is that just, we're trying to make one Cleveland?
Sure.
How do we get rid of that conversation and be one Cleveland?
I like to think that it can be something, if only in a playful way. Like, we all like a little bit of a rivalry. A focus of mine at the same time has been, when I talk about attracting residents, I think that, people who grew up in one part of the county and another part of the county, we tend to feel, at home where we've been at home, but at the same time, we are one larger community, and it doesn't need to be a competition for resources against each other. And I, for many people that say, oh, I hear from people, Ward 17, you're try to insinuate that we're a suburb, and I say, no, we're a Cleveland neighborhood, and we're really a neighborhood full of residents who have chosen to live in Cleveland, to stay in Cleveland, in many cases, work for the city of Cleveland, work for nonprofits, engage in the community, and really focusing our energy on how we can be part of making Cleveland the best version of itself by living in a great neighborhood and being part of the larger city at the same time.
And I think Ward 17 is interesting too, in that there's not a lot of empty vacant lots for development, for growth, for buildings. But how do you see Ward 17 then moving forward and growing into the future, changing?
Sure. So, a lot of, I see our opportunity for growth is on the main corridors, whether it's car lots or just commercial properties that aren't necessarily vacant, but are maybe not performing at full strength. They're not living up to their full potential. I think there's opportunity for in a sense, going back to basics. Cleveland, and including West Park and Cam's Corners, developed as a streetcar suburb, and going up and down the main roads, I think there's opportunities for infill housing and new retail that brings in new residents, but also provides resources and opportunities for all the adjacent side streets that are full of beautiful homes.
What's the most common phone call you get from one of your residents?
Well, it depends on what day it is. If it's a Monday or Tuesday, it's probably about garbage. But the calls that I get are, I think that people want. They want to make sure that their routine city services are being provided. So that's, I'm worried about the tree in the tree lawn. It needs to be inspected and pruned, I think. Garbage can broke. Is the street going to be resurfaced? Wondering if the grass is going to be cut at the park because there's a Little League game later. And a lot of the value I see in being in City Hall just about every day is being able to quickly go and engage with the city workers who provide us these resources, and just to make sure that we're on the same page of schedule and needs and areas, because our city workers really do so much work, far more than they get credit for, I think, and it's helpful for me to partner with them, and it's proven to be very successful. It's to their credit. If the garbage is missed, a supervisor gets out there quickly after a phone call. If the park needs to be cut because that baseball game's coming up, they're able to realign the schedule. So it's, in a sense, being a conduit between the residents who have questions about the city resources and then the people who provide them.
Let's move into our safety forces a little bit. You've worked hard to ensure that our safety forces, fire, EMS, police, have not only the equipment but the manpower. Manpower is something that everyone all over the U.S. is struggling with. What are ways we can get more people to join our forces?
A very timely question because we just came out of a committee meeting on the very topic. That's unfortunately there's no simple answer. As many things that are complex questions have complex answers. So what I see is, certainly our pay is low. Our police officers that work for the city of Cleveland can get an immediate pay bump by taking a lateral move to whether it's a suburban community, go into another large city, Columbus, for example. So recognizing that we need to find the resources to pay market rate, to attract people, to retain people. We also need to be focused on, I think, police morale. It's a tough job, and it's a tough job, and police officers are being asked more and more we've had with our challenges in attracting new recruits, retaining existing officers. We're asking more from fewer officers. So I do worry about burnout. I worry that, not exclusively for police even, but just generally the city of Cleveland as a whole, we're a bit behind the 8 ball in a lot of our human resources policies. So, theoretically, if we're interested in hiring a younger woman to become a police officer, historically having not had any paid parental leave or not having a vacation day for a year really disincentivizes coming to work for the city of Cleveland. So there's a lot of things that we can do internally to try to sweeten the deal. Now there's a lot of larger, across the entire country, police departments are having trouble recruiting, retaining. So it's a societal. As Cleveland City Council can't really control society, but we can try to make sure that we're performing at full strength and not letting ourselves be an impediment to our own success.
And you said Ward 17, it's generally a safe ward, but let's be honest, no single ward is immune to crime, to violence, and we've seen on the news far too often, crime rates are going up in Cleveland. What are you doing in your ward, and what can be done as a whole just to help curb the violence, I guess, and the crime?
So some things the city has done, consistent, routine engagement, I think, with the police commander is an underappreciated resource. And to anyone listening, not just from Ward 17, but certainly the 1st Police District, but other police districts do the same sorts of monthly meetings. Every month, each police district has a community relations meeting where the police commander's there in person. It's an opportunity to come and firsthand engage with police officers. And we've actually seen police redo their patrols, focus on target areas by information that's derived out of those meetings. So it's a really ripe opportunity for residents to speak directly to command staff and allow command staff to understand, what's happening at the ground level. In addition to that, not exclusively recognizing that our numbers are down in police, but also just knowing that there's opportunity to leverage technology. We've installed an increasing number of cameras across the city that are tied into a real-time crime center downtown. That's been a really big deal for Ward 17 just because being on the edge of the city, we were a little low in cameras because the IT infrastructure had to be built out in order to get to the edges of the city. So it was sort of a Ward 17 problem, but also a Ward 8 problem, a Ward 1 problem, kind of the corners of the city. It was harder to get cameras, but there's been an influx of cameras recently, which allows officers downtown to track in real time what's happening. And there's even a way for residents to allow their Ring camera to be tied in more easily with police, which can be done if residents go onto the city website. And essentially what it does is if you give a waiver, instead of, if there were an incident on your street, Dan, instead of the police having to come and knock on your door and saying, can we get footage from your Ring camera, they'd already know your email address and be able to email you and say, can we get a clip from this time to this time, and be able to draw it more seamlessly so that we're not losing time in investigating crimes that do have surveillance footage.
So really good, close connection with the community and the police. That's great, because my next question was talk about that importance of having our officers on the street, having that positive interaction with the residents. And do you see that in your ward too?
We do see it in the ward. Historically, Cleveland did have a residency requirement, and many police officers during that time chose to live in the West Park neighborhood. Contrary to popular belief, many stayed. So it's a neighborhood where engagement with a police officer can often be very easy because you know someone from they're out mowing their lawn or walking their dog and not necessarily in uniform. But we try to have a number of community events, both public safety geared community events where families can come and engage with police officers, but even the credit to the First District community relations officers who are, they're at every event, they're in every school, they're at every church festival, and have really made themselves a part of the community and a familiar face. And I think that it goes a long way in strengthening community and police relations, certainly.
One thing I remember growing up in West Park, I grew up around West 165th, went to St. Mark's School. The Metro Parks were always there, always close access. How are you working to make sure people have even easier access to connect to our Emerald Necklace, as it were?
Sure. So it's somewhat counterintuitive. There was a study a couple years ago by the Trust for Public Land that found the census tracts in Cleveland that have the least park access, and one of those census tracts was actually right in the heart of Cam's Corners. But the irony is that it's immediately adjacent to the Rocky River Reservation. So if you just looked at the map, you'd say, how could you say that census tract doesn't have park access? But the reality is that the Rocky River Valley is just that. It's a valley, and because of the topography change, there's only a couple opportunities for people to actually get into the park. And on the Cleveland side of the park, it's really geared towards driving. If you're not driving into the park, there's not a safe way to get down there. So what we've been working on is increasing the number of Metro Parks type paths into the valley so that people can get down there on bike, whether they're jogging, going for a walk, walking the dog, so that they're not having to either walk down a road or get in the car and drive a mile so that they can go and exercise or something. So to me, it's really one of the most untapped potentials of the Cam's Corners West Park neighborhood. So right now we have a pretty substantial amount of money already raised to construct a new Metro Parks path that would be generally in the area of Fairview Hospital and take residents from the neighborhood down into the Rock River Valley near the Little Met Golf Course. And then there's also some partnership with NOACA, the county, and the city of Lakewood about doing something similar on the northern end of the neighborhood along Hogsback Lane, which is, if anyone's ever walked or driven up Hogsback, it is quite a hill, it is quite long, so it'd be nice to be able to do it without cars zipping past you at the same time.
There's also city parks in your ward. I know you have some openings coming up in some of the city parks. Talk about what's going on with that and where that all stands.
Sure. So we had I think a pretty exciting park opening last year. We dedicated a new playground. It's the officially the Richard Petrus Playground at Drakefield Park. And Richard Petrus was a Cleveland firefighter who, unfortunately, he passed of COVID. But a couple weeks prior to passing, he had actually reached out to me as a resident and said, I live on this street. I raised my children, taking them to this park, and the park. It's time for the park to get a little bit of love. So we were able to build not just a new playground, but a playground that was in recognition of his years of service as a firefighter. So it's kind of a firefighter-themed playground with a tower and a little fire car. It's beautiful. It cost about $500,000. So looking forward, and I can say focus a lot on parks, not only because I'm a dad, but that certainly plays into it. Work should be starting soon on a brand new pool at the Gunning Rec Center. About more or less the entire time I've been on council, the Gunning pool's been closed for one reason or another. And in years of advocacy and speaking with the Bibb administration, we were able to secure funding for that. And then also on the other side of the neighborhood, Impet Park is one of I would certainly suspect most used parks in the neighborhood. I think different parts of town have a lot of smaller parks, but then like that one big park where there's the big parking lot. This is where you're going to have all your big events. This is where you're going to do your Little League sports. Impet Park's that park for us. And the playground, it's certainly seen better days. days. So we were able to secure through Back to Basics legislation, which is funding that became available because of the federal COVID relief, secured $750,000 for a new playground at Impet Park, and which is substantial. But I guess always trying to push the envelope and push for a little bit better. There is a group in the neighborhood called Friends of Impet Park that are really passionate about it. They organize cleanups, they advocate for different projects, and partnering with them to see if we can raise a little bit more money on top of that. Because if you drive around Cuyahoga County, especially in the suburban communities, there's some pretty, amazing playgrounds, and I really want residents of Ward 17, the kids in Ward 17, people coming to Ward 17, to be able to have that level of play experience, which might require, believe it or not, a little bit more than $750,000. It turns out playgrounds are sort of expensive,
and especially nowadays, playgrounds. What I've noticed is the playgrounds appeal to all people of all different types. All-inclusive playgrounds for those, is that something we can see too?
Yeah, well, if you go to a playground, it's not uncommon to see that, it almost kind of doubles as exercise equipment. So you might see even an adult doing some pull-ups, but then instead of everything being steps, there's ramps for, people who are in wheelchairs. There's more inclusive swings. So if a child is physically disabled, maybe has cerebral palsy, being in a traditional belt swing is very difficult, if not impossible. So swings that have more of a latch that you can be latched in, and make sure that we're not leaving anybody out in what we're offering at our parks.
One thing you mentioned earlier too is Hopkins.
Yes.
Is in your area, your ward. What's going on with Hopkins? I know they got a big master plan going on. Where does all this stand? And your thoughts on Hopkins going into the future?
Sure. So if you love airplanes, Ward 17 is the neighborhood for you because we've got airplanes. But yeah, so Hopkins is this year 98 years old. So it's one of the oldest airports, first established municipal airport in the country. And it's anybody who's been through recently probably agree it's seen better days. The airport staff does a real bang up job of keeping it clean, doing what we can with what we have, but it's, you get off the plane in another city and see this big palatial, beautiful airport. It's not really the Cleveland experience. So the airport is in the early stages of a multi-phased airport master plan, which at the end of it will effectively we'll have a brand new international airport. It'll be done in phases. They'll close off a terminal. They'll redo some terminals. They'll demo and build new in some circumstances. There's changes to kind of the traffic movement as you come in to maximize space. A larger ticketing hall. The ticketing hall right now is sized for back in the day when we were a hub. A lot of people came through the airport but never had to go into ticketing. They just stayed behind security. But now 98% or some of our traffic is people coming from the area, so they have to arrive in the ticketing hall, and it feels crowded. We're undersized in security. So it's a very exciting project. It's very expensive, but the good news for Cleveland taxpayers is that it's not taxpayer funded. So the airport is funded all by the fees the airlines pay to operate at the airport, as well as the revenue from all the concessions when you're buying that Starbucks or that Cinnabon. So with that money, we're able to over time build our new Cleveland Hopkins International Airport so that we can really have an asset to be proud of for the next 100 years.
And what an asset it is. And boy, I can't believe 100 years doesn't seem, it just seems
right?
right.
I think they just invented flight. So the fact that we have a 100-year airport seems kind of crazy. Yeah.
When I think about being on council, I think about two jobs. One, you have the jobs where you are for your residents, but the other one is you have your main business within council, your committee business, things like that. Sure. You're the vice chair of the Transportation Mobility Committee. Correct. What is that committee? What does it do?
Sure. So historically, it was maybe a bit of a misnomer. The Transportation Committee really only focused on the airport. So it's a city-owned airport. So if a new airline wants to come in and lease space, legislation's required. If the airport wants to go out and they got to buy new light bulbs, the legislation's required. So it was a lot of kind of routine airport business. But in this council, under Council President Griffin's leadership and Carrie McCormick, who's majority leader but also the chairman of the committee, really saw the potential for the Transportation Committee to expand, and the expansion of it into transportation and mobility really has the intention of doing all that airport work that's still important, but also recognizing that transportation also affects our day-to-day lives. So how can we think about how people can move through our city more safely? So some examples of that, how do we increase our bike infrastructure? A substantial percentage of Clevelanders don't own a car, and we all see people riding bikes, sometimes in a bike lane, but sometimes just on a road that it seems like you kind of worry about their safety. So how can we build off-road facilities that's going to let people get where they need to go a little more safely? If you're around downtown, you see all the different scooters trying to focus on our public transportation so that people don't have to be so car reliant if they don't want to be so car reliant. And the other thing to note is we have a city program called Vision Zero. And the point of Vision Zero is to make all of our transportation decisions focus around the goal of having zero pedestrian fatalities. So in that, thinking through, how are we thinking about speed limits? How are we implementing speed tables? How are we designing our roads in a way that's not going to let people drive 80 miles an hour down a side street when kids are, playing kickball out front. So the Transportation and Mobility Committee has taken on a lot of that work as well, that policy work, to think through how we can make our city a bit safer. Because you asked about common complaints we get. People speeding is a very common complaint, and just frankly, our roads are often built. You wonder why someone's going 50 down Chester Avenue. It kind of is built for going 50, So if we want people to go at safer speeds, we need to think about that built environment and how we kind of encourage people to make the right decision more effectively.
Mayor Bibb said he wants to make Cleveland a 15-minute city. Mm-hmm. Is that something where that committee would be definitely involved with and making sure that plan gets implemented as well?
Sure. So the 15-minute city is essentially the idea that we all have all of the different amenities, day-to-day amenities you need within a 15-minute, whether it's drive, bike, walk, bus ride, rapid ride. So that's, that everyone is near a grocery store and a daycare and the parks and those kinds of amenities. And so they do play off of each other very closely. The goal of 15-minute cities is, as we're thinking about where to put investments, that we should be making sure that we are providing resources so that people aren't living in a food desert, so that people aren't living somewhere where they don't have a park nearby. And I think a lot of the reason people move to cities is because they want to be near things. So it's being thoughtful about where we're helping things be, so that people aren't having to drive out to Warrensville or Westgate or what have you to do simple things like buy a pair of shoes or grab a cup of coffee.
What are some of the biggest challenges you see the committee facing when you reconvene this coming September and going on?
Sure. So, the biggest one likely is the master plan for the airport. We're excited to have a new airport director on board. We are seeing very solid airline growth at Hopkins and just making sure that we are partnering with our partners in the airlines to move this plan forward, because, the day that the plan was finished and printed, we are already late. We've rebounded from COVID essentially in our travel numbers, and people are feeling kind of squeezed at the airport, so the time is now.
In council, you passed two laws that I see: the paid parental leave and the paid safe leave. Talk about those. What does each one do?
Sure. So we'll start with paid safe leave because that happened first. This is actually a policy recommendation that came to council through a project from students at Cleveland State. And a safe leave policy creates a separate bank of time that's available for City of Cleveland employees who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault. If it's the case that an employee needs to take time off because they need to move, they need to go to court, they need to go to medical appointments because of this traumatic incident, we wanted to make sure that people had the ability to do so. And what we were finding is that because of how some more of the city's arcane leave policies, you have people coming to work that aren't taking care of their needs first and foremost because they were worried about losing the pay. So this guarantees essentially that people are able to seek out the resources that they need in a very traumatic time and be able to do so, not having to forego any of their pay, and come back to work when they're ready. And one of the great testaments of the law is that it's not used too terribly, but it's so impactful to the people who have it, who need it, and who use it. So there's no cost to it, but I think it sets an important standard for how we treat city workers, not just as little functionaries who, whether they're on a computer or up, fixing a power line, but that these are people who we need to support as whole humans. And growing from there, recently passed a paid parental leave policy, which the city of Cleveland's been very behind in. This is standard practice in most large cities. The state government has a policy, federal government has a policy, but this is creating a guarantee that a city worker, after having a child, giving birth, will have 12 weeks of paid time off to take care of their baby. This is arguably the most important time in that child's life when it comes to their health and welcoming someone into the family. And we were recognizing that city employees were either taking that time unpaid while having to incur all the costs of childbirth and child care down the road and all these things, or they were draining all of their vacation and sick time and then not having any left over when your 4-month-old inevitably gets sick. So we estimate about 100 city employees have a child every year. So again, it's when you look at it from our ability to deliver services, what it would cost, the concerns are very few, but it's really important and impactful for those employees. It helps us retain them. It helps us attract additional employees, and I think it really sets a standard. Cleveland tragically has a high infant mortality rate. We are spending a lot of city dollars in making sure that women, especially lower income women, and especially in communities of color, have access to prenatal services, perinatal services. So by passing paid parental leave, I think it's an instance of the city of Cleveland kind of putting its money where its mouth is. And I'm hopeful that other employees that behind the 8 ball on this will start to join with us, because we need to be thinking about families.
Two great laws, because you're focusing on the most stressful times in someone's life, and now you're taking away one aspect of stress, and that's your job is safe and secure.
Sure.
Take care of what you need to take care of. The laws went through, but there's a process to that. You don't just say, I'm going to pass a law. There is a process to it that has to come before council, be read. Talk about that. Sure. It's not easy, is it?
No. I joined council in 2019, and sort of from day one, I've been pushing on this. And the city of Cleveland, and not just the city of Cleveland, but every municipality in the state of Ohio has to have a balanced budget. So whenever an idea comes forward, the first question is can we afford it? Because it's unfortunately we are limited in the things that we can do. So years of work and understanding, how many people would be impacted? Would it negatively impact our services? Is this how sustainable is it moving forward? How specifically is the policy? There's different ways you can kind of take a bite at the apple of what the end policy looks like. And communicating with other council members to hear their feedback and build in their ideas. One of the real values of having 17 members of council that I think goes a little is understated or underappreciated is that we're 17 people. We're not we're just regular residents who live in the city of Cleveland. We come with our life experience, and it's very useful to be able to go and talk to my colleagues and present an idea, hear their feedback, and really build towards a better policy, a better law, a better ordinance that is going to make sure that it's impacting the most people. So yeah, years of work go into the background in all of this, as we're also trying to do any number of tasks that we have in front of us at the same time. So it keeps you busy, but it's important work, and I'm happy to do it for the residents.
And that's great too. With the 17, you have council persons who have been there and done that before. The Dean of Council, Councilman Mike Polensek, you can go to him and say what will work, what won't work, and he'll go through his experience. So I like that whole camaraderie and getting things working for the city. We've talked about a lot of you, your ward. How can people get a hold of you?
Man, in the year 2023, how can't you get a hold of me? The easiest thing is giving the office a call if I don't answer the phone. Normally my assistant, Mary, is right there ready to pick up the phone. Phone number is 216-664-4239. Email. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, but also, if you spend any time in Ward 17, you'll see me out and about. I make a point of kind of riding my bike around because it creates more opportunities just to casually bump into each other. I'm with my kids at the park. I'm at church. I'm at the store. I'm at the restaurant. So I hope people sometimes get worried coming up to me at the park and saying, I don't want to bother you. And I'm like, if I didn't want to be bothered, I wouldn't be here. Part of the job is being out and visible, and I'm happy to, meet people where they are. Because if you don't meet people where they are, you might not meet them at all. Mm-hmm. So,
finally, what do you like to do when you're not councilman? What do you like to do when you're just Charles with your family? What do you like to do? Blow off steam, to relax? Do you have any hobbies?
Sure. So, I aspirationally read. Don't have much time for that. But yeah, I have 2 kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So if I'm not working, I'm probably watching Bluey, taking them to the park, taking them to the pool. I do get out and try to jog as much as I can, just to, so I don't have to keep buying new suits. But it's nothing exciting. I'm probably probably the most boring member of council. I don't get out and do many fun things. So,
right. Yeah. Well, Councilman, thank you so much for joining me today. We learned an awful lot. And if you see Councilman Slife out at Gunning or out at Empit Park, stop on up and say hi. Tell him about your broken garbage can. He'll help you out. Councilman, thank you so much, and thank you for watching Catching Up with the Council. I'm Dan Monroe, and we'll see you next time.